And they voted public enemy most to get the most popular group to get assassinated or killed because what we were saying and what we were doing.
Yo, Chuck, these honey drippers are still front on us. Show them that we can do this, cause we always do this.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.
We are back in effect at the Detroit is Different podcast studios, and I am here with another Detroiter, adding different things to the mix. Somebody that I've known for a long time, friend and mom of one of my favorite little homies who's now like grown as ever. So that makes me like an old person. But Tiffany Tilley, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. So
this cold December day.
It's not that cold. It's not that cold. We are in Detroit. It gets colder.
It
does. You know what I'm saying? This is a December day. You know what I'm saying? We're going to speak it. We're going to speak it into existence. But we're going to start this whole thing off with the usual start of Detroit is Different interviews. Your family. How did your family come and make their way to the city of Detroit? Who is on your mom's side? Do you know who the first family member that made it to Detroit?
Both of my mother's parents lived in other places. My grandmother came from Mobile, Alabama.
Okay.
My grandfather came from the Carolinas. Interesting story.
And what brought him to the D?
My grandmother was coming looking for a better life. Her siblings had come up, and they were working for the factories. And
they sent for her?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So she came up. Some of her siblings stayed behind in Alabama, but she came up, and she was older when she had my mother. She was 42, but I think she came up maybe in her early 20s or something.
Okay. And your grandfather, you said the Carolinas. What did he come up for?
So, my grandfather's father was moving some moonshine.
Ain't that something?
And he was moving moonshine for a Caucasian man that he worked for. It was his moonshine. Mm-hmm. And then a couple of Caucasian gentlemen tried to rob him. And he said, "This is my boss, moonshine." You know, legend has it.
Legend.
This is my boss moonshine. I can't let y'all get this moonshine. And I guess it became physical, and he killed them.
Wow.
And he ran up to Detroit.
And it's as horrific and as scary as that story seems, that story is a story that kind of reigns true in a lot of families. Like a lot of people fled the South to the North for safety.
Yep.
From
racism,
situations like that. Yeah. From racism situations where, you know, it led into violence or death or the possible risk of death or lynching or something like that. So it was like middle of the night, clothes on your back, gone.
Yep. And thank God, you know, he made it. He sent for my grandfather. My mother was my grandfather's only child. I am my mother's only child.
Wow.
So, yeah, if he would not have made it, I would not have been here.
So, that alone, what neighborhoods did they grow up in the city when they got here?
So, my grandmother purchased a house on Cherry Lawn, Pembroke, and Chippewa. It's definitely the hood now, but, you know, when my grandmother purchased that home in the 40s, and even when my mother grew up and I grew up, it was a different time. Everybody was family. So for a time, I even stayed there with my children. And it's a few neighbors left still holding it down on that particular block. But everybody's families just grew up together. Um, you know, I grew up with people that my mother had grown up with. The seniors that I used to go play with and spend time with. We were talking when I was a teenager, maybe, and she said, you know, I used to go spend time with those same seniors and hang out with them. So, you were outside playing. It was a situation where you knew that you were safe. I knew my kids were safe because for generations, we all held that block down.
Okay, and that neighborhood is definitely one of the, I would say, more like recognizable West Side neighborhoods. When people think, like, when I think 7 Mile, I don't know why I always think West 7 Mile, but that may be the West Sider in me. But I think of like those blocks, those streets, that area. I think of that.
Johnson Recreation Center.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of controversy going on right now with, I know the city is giving it to U of D Jesuit. But yeah, those were some great times. The Johnson Recreation Center really was central for that neighborhood. Every year they had a big picnic that we would go to, and again, those generations would come together, listen to music, dance, play, you know, have fun, eat. And the center was a safe place to go swim and learn different lessons like ceramics and different things that they had for the youth. We need to get back to more of that. And then my mom, she bought a house on Westmoreland and 6 Mile. So grew up in that neighborhood. And we also owned a home on Virgil, Jeffries and Telegraph.
Okay, and a whole different type of culture in that neighborhood. But let's talk a little bit about your dad's family. How did they make their way to the city?
So my grandmother was born in Florida. My grandfather was from Arkansas, from Hope, Arkansas. My family is actually really well known there. I haven't been yet, but they're educators down there. I'm the great niece of Henry Clay Yerger, who he started the first Negro school there. And he was born into slavery. Slavery was abolished when he was 5 years old. But he started a school, and the school grew so big that today there's a high school there named in his honor, a middle school. They started building a small museum. The state of Arkansas actually used his curriculum as a model for the state. And Bill Clinton included my family in his memoirs.
Wow. Now, what's unique about that is usually families from Florida and Arkansas kind of usually make their way all the way up, I don't know why, to Chicago. They usually don't come Detroit pathway.
Well, and then they didn't do that first. My grandfather and my grandmother met in California.
Ain't that something? So they went out west.
They went out west.
Okay.
And then somehow my grandmother's mother came to Detroit, and she was here sick. And so my grandmother had married another man, moved out here to Michigan. My father was ill. He had tuberculosis, and he was in a sanatorium. And so she left him behind with his father and in the hospital, and came out to Detroit and helped take care of her mother.
So that's what kind of led her this way. Okay,
Yep.
because that's the other place if they migrated up to the Midwest, it usually would be Chicago. Like it's a lot of people from Georgia, Alabama, those roots here in Detroit. Usually Arkansas, Florida. It's almost like the further west you go, that's usually Chicago or further west. You know, Texas is a lot of people from California out there. But this history kind of gives a framework for your parents, and then like the scope of how things kind of came together. What was it like for you as far as growing up? What neighborhood would you say you lived in most as a child?
Well, my mother was so close to her parents. We spent a lot of time at my grandmother's. So I was definitely back and forth a lot. And then my grandmother, she fell ill, and we moved in with my grandmother for a time to help take care of her. Until she passed, and we stayed at the house a little while longer. My mother had rented out her house on Westmoreland, and she bought a house on Virgil.
So you kind of identify with maybe your grandmother's neighborhood a whole lot more as your childhood neighborhood?
No, I identify with all of them. I still have childhood friends that I keep in touch with from all three of those neighborhoods.
Okay, because even just like the characteristics of like, I kind of label neighborhoods by the high school in the area, which now with so many high schools not open anymore. So like Virgil, 90, and Jeffries, that would be like
Redford High School.
Exactly. So Redford versus the Chippewa, which is more like a Mumford neighborhood. That's like a whole different, like as close, but it's a different feel, a different type of neighborhood, especially like when you think about that Redford neighborhood around like I would say kind of like the late 70s to like maybe the early 90s. It was a lot of like younger families moving in over there.
And it was very diverse.
That too.
It was a very diverse neighborhood. So,
like people even tell me, I don't remember it because I don't think we could have went. I think I was alive, but I don't think we could have went. Like where it was a amusement park over there.
it was not an amusement park, but it was every year they had the festival at St. Gemma, which I attended that school as well. Yeah. And then Bishop Borges had a festival every year too.
Okay.
And it was in walking distance.
So like so what was it like? What high school did you choose? Did you end up going over to Redford? What high school did you go to?
So I had grown up in private school, and you know, all of my friends went to public school, and they took the bus to school. And they made it sound so exciting. Redford was rough, and it was something different than, you know, anything I had really experienced. And I said, you know, I want to go to public high school. And my mother wanted me to go to Cranbrook. And I said, I don't want to go to Cranbrook. And then she said, well, at least go to Bishop Borges. And I remember we toured. And I said, I want to go to school with my friends. I want to experience, you know, going to a public school and riding the bus. And so I started out at Redford, and I was 13 years old. And I got right in, you know, it was into the culture. It was totally different from anything that I had experienced. Of course, the private schools that I had attended were small, and there were over 2,000 kids there. One thing that I noticed right away was the difference in the curriculum, and I actually felt bad for the kids, because I knew that the level of education was totally different than what they should have been getting.
So did you like Redford?
I loved Redford. I got kicked out of Redford, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I wasn't doing really well. I mean, and I wasn't necessarily getting into things like some kids, like they would offer me, you know, marijuana, and I'd be like, no, thank you. So, you know, really wasn't doing those things. I tried a skip party or two, and I was like, this is not my thing. So,
You just weren't.
But I did. I
you just
did get
didn't
into.
You just weren't doing the work.
I was so bored. So I was not. When I was 10 years old, my MEP scores were in reading was that of a graduating senior. So I was totally bored at Redford. I got into a fight, got kicked out, and then went over to Henry Ford.
Okay. And that's the other school around that neighborhood as well. So.
And we also transitioned back to Westmoreland when I was about 16. So that worked with me, being closer to Henry Ford.
Okay. All right. So from there in your journey, from private school to now getting kicked out of school, I know that was like a complete culture shock, and I can only imagine your mom was like, "This is why we didn't want you going to public school in the first place." What was that like from that lens? As I'm sure a lot of parents are listening and thinking to themselves, like, why can't I connect with my kids? But sometimes just that social pressure that young people have can be overwhelming because your friends matter so much. What people think about you matters so much. Being a teenager, it's a lot of anxieties and insecurities that can be overwhelming, that as adults we look back and say, okay, why did we even think about that? But what was that like, if you kind of can remember just that transition?
Yeah, because I feel so old now. That was a long time ago. But no, it was definitely a confusing time. My grandmother ended up passing when I was 9, and when I was 10, my mother became ill. She had multiple sclerosis. She went blind in one eye. She had a stroke. So she was disabled. And my life really changed at that point. And so in high school, it just, it was difficult. I began driving at 12.
As a caregiver for your mother, correct? And do you think, as we were talking about just the grieving process, do you think that some of the grieving process for your mother, like your mother's illness, may have been kind of connected to her losing her mother, possibly?
Definitely. I really think, and she thought that. She thought that it was because, she lost her mom. Her mom, she was an amazing mother and grandmother. She was strong. She was, I almost want to say Medea type, but a lot more class with it. But she was a caregiver. So she spoiled us rotten. And my mother, I think, felt like, who's going to take care of me now? And she worked and things like that. But she just, her mom she was so dependent on her mother and her parents, period.
And this kind of goes into something that we spoke about, as you lost your mother and I lost my mother. But we can share this on Detroit is Different. Just the grieving process for anyone, but especially in the Black community, because we can already be we can already be coming from a position of pain or hurt or struggle in seeing the world and like through our interpretation. How do you think, this is more like a macro question, the grieving process in our community could be more, I guess, more positive, helpful? How can we empathize with one another a whole lot more in it, recognizing that there are some challenges that do exist in our community when it comes to that?
I think we have to start looking inside. I think some people are extremely judgmental. They can be negative, which will make it hard for a person to open up to them and let them know what they're really going through. And then that makes, a person feel alone. And not to say that that's necessarily what my mother was going through, but just in a general sense in our community, we have to work on ourselves and be better people so that we can help one another. And be in that mind frame of how can I really be a support to somebody else, and how can I empathize? And even though I'm not going through this and I can't imagine it, I know that this person is in a lot of pain. And I could imagine that a situation like that would cause a lot of pain. So, let me check on that person. A lot of times when people experience death, there's people around, people come bring food. When my mother died, people weren't bringing me food, but my family wanted me to come stay with them. Different family members wanted me to come stay with them. But after the funeral, a lot of times people don't have people checking on them. You have a lot of people that are calling you and bombarding you, but it gets so quiet afterwards. So I think we still need to be mindful that even though the funeral is over with and they've gotten past that part, they still need people to talk to, people to lean on.
Yeah, I think I can agree. And then sometimes I can be in my own head so much because when the person does lose someone, it's hard to even know a response. Just sometimes just being a sounding board, let alone all of the phone numbers I have in my contacts of people that have passed on. Like every year, it just gets larger and larger, and it's so. You ever have that moment, like those, it gives a moment for pause almost,
Yeah.
Because mom is going to be in my phone and your phone for forever,
Yeah. Yeah.
let alone
Yep.
those last text messages, those last phone calls,
Yeah.
that's going to stand there. But
Yep.
so many other people as well, where it's damn,
Yeah.
So I like what you were saying. Just check in and then touch base. If
I learned because it used to be difficult for me. I didn't know what to do when I was younger for people. So now if somebody's sick and they're close to me, if somebody, with their family or friend, if there's a death, I will at least text people, because sometimes you don't know if it's an inconvenient time to call or not. So I will at least text them, send them, a heart, pray, the hands, the praying hands, let them know that they're in my thoughts and in my prayers. Ask them if there's anything that they need, anything that I can do for them. Sometimes, taking somebody out to lunch, just encouraging them. Yeah.
So I agree. And then I would say also give people space to not necessarily respond in the way you think they're going to respond, because sometimes the mind is not as since my mom's passed, and I definitely know I've been more I may not respond in the way that most people think I will respond, and it's not necessarily being aloof or disrespectful. It's just I don't know. It's okay. Let me walk away. I'm not about to get a stroke over something that I'm not as interconnected to. Which kind of brings us back to you and your journey, because as you stepped up more in a role of caregiving, as your mother needed more support, brothers and sisters, or was it just you?
I was my mom's only child. She did have different relationships and marriages and a fiance. So there were different people in the house, and sometimes their children would come visit or come for the summer, or their family members. But it was off and on. So it would be people in the house, and then it would be empty. And then it would be people in the house, then it would be empty. So, and just depending on the guy that was there, depending on, you know, his style or whatever, I may have had to do more cleaning and cooking and different things, depending on who was in the household.
And this was like a role that you kind of took on at like 11, like 10, 11, 12?
Yeah, when my grandmother was living, we had a full-time housekeeper, 9 to 5 type of, housekeeper that helped out, did everything while my mother and my grandfather were at work. After my grandmother passed and my mom got sick, of course, I became like the housekeeper.
You were like Florence on the Jeffersons.
Or Cinderella. My friends used to call me Cinderella. But
Say Florence.
it was a difficult transition going from being spoiled rotten to, now having...
To maintain a household as a kid.
Yeah.
So, but learning to cook and all of that stuff, did you pick up all those recipes from your grandmother? Did you have to learn on the fly? Did your mom show you? Like, how did you get that?
Well, my grandmother died when I was 9. I definitely remember her cooking and miss her cooking. She didn't teach me how to. My mother did teach me how to cook, and my mother had cookbooks, and she would sit at the table and instruct me on what I was doing, especially with larger meals, holiday meals, or different things, And I would experiment. I ended up learning to love cooking, and by my family coming from the Gulf Coast in Mobile, Alabama, food is big for us. So, I began experimenting.
Okay. So, as you're thrusted into like now this as a child, but
I feel like I'm in a therapy session.
You were grown as ever too. Yeah, it can be like that. Somebody said that before with one of these. But that's a unique position, to be in as a kid. So you were like pseudo daughter, pseudo mother, and friend, throughout this whole thing, and still taking on school and everything.
And then too, I was rebellious because I was angry. And I didn't understand why, as a child, I was angry. But I went through a lot of transitions, didn't really have anybody to talk to, didn't know how to communicate what I was feeling, and didn't have people I could really trust a lot of people I could trust to share those burdens with, whether it be the responsibility or the sharing of the emotions.
And what you're opening up about, I think a lot of young people feel today too, and just grown people too, but especially like a young person, because sometimes it may even be when you're that age, you don't even necessarily know how to communicate some of the things you're going through as well.
Exactly.
So it's like, man,
I was an introvert, so it was I did not have those skills at that
I had
time.
this emotion. It's something, and I feel it, but I don't even know how to say it.
Yep.
But I know I feel it. So as this goes on, you graduate. What's after high school?
After high school was babies and marriage. I married my high school sweetheart that I had met at Retford. We had 2 children.
Both of them very dynamic and creative. Tony and Tilley. Tony and Tilley, I'm definitely closer to Tilley, as she is like everything I'm doing with content. I think she's going to do, if not more, like times 1,000. So definitely you've added to the culture of our people with your children.
And I've taught them to be independent. I did not want, God forbid, something to happen to me and them have to go through the type of transition that I went through. So I always stayed close, but I let them explore and learn. And they have a great independence about themselves. They're both young adults. My son bought his first investment property at 22, and it's a 2-family flat here in Detroit, and he's still fixing it up. And he's making plans on his next property. He's working full time, so he's slowly putting money in, and he has people helping him. His Masonic brothers are helping him. His uncle is helping him. Neighbors have pitched in. Mama has come over with money, or he said one time, I need a lamp.
Sometimes that's what you need.
And I need it now. So I had to take him a lamp.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes it's difficult. We bump heads a lot because he is so independent and in thought, and he wants to do everything his way. Which experience sometimes is a good teacher, but also you have those elders that you can lean on that have had those experiences that you can listen to, so it's not so rough. But he's very strong-willed. And then my daughter, she moved down to Florida with her father and her grandmother, and she's going to school full-time, and she's working full-time, and she's finding herself and making her way. And miss her so much. She was sending me pictures this morning and last night that she was finding that my mother-in-law still had of me and them, and of my grandfather and my mom. And I said, you must be missing me. She said, I am. Yeah.
So having children, as I think that obviously that's the most epic form of creativity we have in life. What was that transition to motherhood like for you?
I was so young. It seems like when I did it, I was 18. I knew absolutely nothing. I had not really even babysat before. I think by then I had maybe once or twice or something. Not any real experience in babysitting or changing diapers or anything like that. I had never even changed a boy's diaper before. And my mother really wasn't of assistance, So I remember I had, and I'm a pack rat. My grandparents are older grandparents. They're from the Depression era. So I learned to be a pack rat. And I actually found this card cleaning out the basement the other day to Sinai Hospital, Sinai Grace. Sinai. I had my son in Sinai and my daughter in Sinai Grace. And I would call the nurse to ask questions, of what I should do. During my pregnancy, I had several books, and I was reading the books to teach myself, about my pregnancy, about the different stages of pregnancy, about things that I would experience, about things to help me, as far as a mom after I had the baby. And I also nursed full time. I did not pump. So that was, that was all of that at a young age and without really any guidance or much guidance.
Okay. And just that connection, do you think that was something that just inspired you? Because we've talked about family so much, business-wise, and your community efforts, you have a lot of experience, and you've done a lot of things and accomplished things worldwide. So do you think that just seeing that come to life, it was a catalyst to venture into more?
At one point, I just remember thinking I was hurting so much from different things that were going on in my life and that I had no idea of how to navigate. Um, and things that I felt like were out of my control. And I just really start thinking about other people that are in pain and what they're going through, and I just wanted to hug the world.
Okay, so let's talk about the hugging the world and in community work, which is kind of politics, because that's how we connected. That's how we met. So, what were some of your community efforts? What was the first thing you did? How did you go about it? Why did you go about it?
I started out as an activist. It was something that was always in me. Politics, activism. Even as a small child, I was walking up and down the street with a makeshift sign saying vote for Dukakis," yelling at the cars that went by. Um, and I was always interested in activism, never had an avenue. I was interested in, the movement of the civil rights era, the NAACP, all of these great organizations, MLK, Malcolm X. But I felt like, where are they? All of that is gone. It was a different era and different time. I didn't realize that we still had great organizations around. So when I found out, I started getting involved in different organizations and nonprofits, and I was an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer.
Okay, was that like one of the first ones that you were engaged in?
I think how I even got to that point, my cousin was murdered 2 blocks from my home. And he was at the corner store on Cherry Lawn. And Cherry Line and 8 Mile. And the store clerk had got into an argument with somebody in the store. And somehow my cousin and his friend, they were about to exit the store. The store clerk came from behind the counter, and the guy started beating him up really bad. Well, as you can imagine, it's a neighborhood store, so you know the clerk. You've been knowing him for years. My cousin actually didn't want to get involved. He was like, okay, he didn't want anything to do with it. His friend said, no, we got to help him. My cousin said, that's not our business. We need to leave. His friend tried to help, and then he started getting beat up. So then my cousin, now his personal friend,
help.
Now he had to help, and so he roughed the guy up, and then the guy was upset. The guy hadn't too long been out of jail for murder. I don't even know if it was a whole year that he had been out. And my cousin thought it was over. It was a fight. It wasn't, weapons or anything. And so he went on about his life. He was driving back to his grandmother's house on Rose Lawn a couple days later from wherever he was at. He had a girlfriend who he had, it was kind of the high school sweetheart type of thing. They had been together for a minute, and she was pregnant. And he was on his way to go watch the game with his dad and feed his grandmother. And the guy had found out who he was and boxed him in, a vehicle in front of him, a vehicle behind him, and they murdered him. I think it was like seven shots.
Very sad and unfortunate.
But that started my path for activism. I wanted to do something. So at the Johnson Recreation Center, I think on the maybe 1 year anniversary, I did a Stop the
So
Violence
right
rally.
in your neighborhood, in that neighborhood too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that it was so important there too, because it was not just my cousin, and it was called the Manny Project after my cousin. And I turned Manny into an acronym, mending a neighborhood, needing impact every day. And so that particular neighborhood, it was constant. The murders, the gunshots. I remember my mom had moved to Tennessee, her and her husband, and my kids, we went to visit, and my son was 8, and he said, I don't want to go back. I don't want to hear, I haven't heard any gunshots since I've been here. He was 8 years old. So yeah, I started with the Stop the Violence rallies, and that, I mean, I think I did it in 2 weeks, and people were like, there's no way you're going to do this. It was 2 or 3 weeks. And I said, we're going to do this. I raised money, did a program book, and so ads to raise money just to get the stage from the city. I was so hurt that the city wouldn't let us borrow the stage. I'm like, we're trying to do something in the community for the community, and we can't get the stage. No, it's $400. So I had to raise the money for it. And then there were vendors, and I gave out free vending tables. I wasn't trying to make any money. And at that point, I didn't even know how to throw a real birthday party. I just knew that I wanted to do something for the community. So Donnell White from the NAACP came to be on the panel.
And then did you
James
know
Tate.
that, like, you just reached out to them or met them? How did you make these connections?
I think along my path, I worked for the Election Commission, and I was starting to do little things. I had just met different people, and I think I had met Hester Wheeler, and who was the executive director at the time. I think he sent
Executive
Donnell. I
director
think that's how I
of
met
the
Donnell.
NAACP, which later Donnell White became the executive director of the NAACP, Detroit NAACP. Yep. Okay. And James Tate, this is before he's city council member.
This was before city council. I actually met James Tate. I was the communications director of the Central Business District downtown. He was the communications director for the city at the time when we met, and then he became the deputy chief, a deputy chief of police. Edward Foxworth was the moderator. Pastor Glenn Plummer was on the panel. I can't remember who else was on the panel that first year, but we had several people on the panel, different organizations that had the vending tables, and one of those organizations I ended up becoming an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer at. And it grew every year. I did it for 4 years in a row. By the time the 4th year was there, the African American Museum had given it to us for free. The 2nd year, we did it at the park down in Cass Corridor. But the weather was bad, so we decided the next year to move it to the museum. So the 3rd year, we paid for the museum. The 4th year, they loved it so much, they gave it to us for free.
That's a blessing.
It's a huge blessing. We had 15 community partners. Bella Marshall was one of the sponsors. Henry Ford had become a community partner. The ARC Nonviolence Program, Pioneers for Peace, BAG, Brothers Against Gun Violence, all kind of great organizations and people just came together. The AKAs and the Ivy-lets, the young AKAs, and it was so many people. Minister Malik Shabazz, the Nation of Islam. I tried to bring as many people and diverse people. You know, a lot of times when you go to things like that, you see the same type of mindset, the same type of people. For me, how can we stop the violence if we're not all coming together from different sects, from grassroots to Christians to Muslims to just everybody coming together as leaders and showing the young people that, hey, even though you're different, you can come together and work together.
So this
and people don't know this. There was a huge fight between Pastor Glenn Plummer, who was my pastor, and the Nation of Islam at the time. He was getting death threats because he was very vocally attacking them. I use the word attack verbally. He didn't agree with the nation or he was just vocal about his thoughts or feelings, and it was very public. I ended up I think it was actually after the last rally, getting the two together and getting it all to stop. They actually had a face-to-face. It was just my pastor, a representative from the nation, myself, and they shook hands and they walked away more like brothers than enemies.
That's good. That's powerful. I mean, that right there caused, engaged in less attacks or violence. And you also willed it so much as we connected through that. Definitely. I think about that. I think about the chance that I got to, I introduced you to Mama P, or Proof's mother.
Yes, she was a part of it too.
And that's what I always think of. Rest in peace, Mama P. Rest in peace, Proof.
Yeah.
But from there, you wielded relationships with a lot of people throughout the state, and then people kind of saw your skills in politics and networking and connecting people together. From there, where do you go? What's your inspiration? What was your path? Because that was community work, but then, that spirit of entrepreneurship, that spirit of, what do I do with some of these skill sets? And then you build a confidence base when you see something like that can come to life, when that idea becomes reality.
It went from about 75 people the first year to over 400 people the last year that we did it in attendance. I think you take one step and then God guides you to another step. And then doors just kept opening. And I didn't give up. You get so many different obstacles and things that come up in your way, but I just kept pushing because it wasn't for myself anyway. It was about the greater good and helping people. So we were in a state when I was a Vista volunteer. I was at the Detroit Parent Network, and at that time we were about to lose affirmative action. And so I stepped up and I was organizing and I was working with different people, including the NAACP and One Michigan. And I was on the forefront organizing parents, trying to save it. My kids were in the fight, trying to save it. They were small. My son, I think he was around 8 or 9 at that time, and he was just, he watched the news. He would watch the news every day, and he saw the news before I did, and he said, "Ma, we lost affirmative action," and he was just so disappointed, because we all, both of them, we all fought so hard, but I just kept joining different fights. I went down to Gina, Louisiana, organized parents, got them on the NAACP buses, and we went down there, and when they hung the nooses, I just kept different issues, just raised the wage campaign, I was a big part of that. I was a field director for that. And during the affirmative action piece, I got tapped by now State Rep Isaac Robinson to join the Democratic Party. And I said, I'm an independent. I don't want to join the party. And he said, well, we're doing a lot of the things that you're doing, and I think you would be a good fit, and, just come check us out. So I went to a Young Dems event. It was crazy. It was extremely crazy. It was their convention, and, people were vying for their place, the youth across the state, young adults. And he said, you got to sign this paperwork. I said, that's membership paperwork. He said, that's just to sign in. I was like, no. And he was like, no, it's to sign in.
They Kaepernick you.
He tricked me. And I said, well, I'm not paying. He said, you don't have to pay. Just sign it. And next thing I knew, because I'm thinking, well, I didn't pay for it. So I'm thinking, I'm not a member. Well, you don't have to pay to be a member of the Democratic Party. You can get a free membership. So after that, I just stuck with it, and I didn't turn back. I became the treasurer of the Young Dems of Michigan. I became and I began to go to the YDA, the Young Dems of America's conventions nationally. I became the Great Lakes Regional Director for the Jewish Caucus. And then after I aged out, I became the corresponding secretary for the 14th Congressional District.
So as this keeps going on right now, what are you working on today? And we're running out of time, but what are you working on today as you've touched so many different organizations? And I see the connection of since being a child, you've taken on different skill sets and knowing how to organize and knowing how to capitalize on opportunity, and then playing a role in those opportunities presented.
And survival.
So what are you working on now?
So I'm still the corresponding secretary of the 14th. I also ended up becoming the corresponding secretary of Southfield Lathrop Village Dems, which I stepped down from. I was also on the executive board for the Oakland County Democratic Party. I live in Southfield. I stepped down from that because I ended up running for office for State Board of Education. It's a statewide seat. I received almost 1.8 million votes in this last election cycle, and so I had to free up some space. And then I also became the NASB rep, the national representative for the state board.
NASB.
And
What's
so
that?
the National Association School Boards of Educators. And then in addition to that, I run a nonprofit organization. It's called the Southfield Community Anti-Drug Coalition. And we work with middle school, high school, and young adults up to age 21. I'm the first director of this coalition. There are now 20 coalitions. We were the 19th in Oakland County. And some of them have been around a long time, but we're still kind of new. I decided to apply for the DFC grant, which is the grant that the coalitions across the nation get. People, I think, didn't really think I would get the grant because coalitions that are under 5 years don't get the grant. We got the grant. So I had done a lot of work to make sure that we had stability and structure and a strong, solid foundation. We have a great executive board and advisory board, and we've been working with the former Boys and Girls Club in Southfield, and we've done summer programs the last 2 summers there. We're working with Southfield Public Schools. Now that we have the grant, we can expand to do programming in the schools. And we just gave a Narcan training, which was great. I don't know if you heard about the story with the mother of the young children that were in the house.
Yeah,
It
I
was
heard about
3
that.
adults in the house,
That all were
and they called the
overdosed,
police.
yeah.
They overdosed. So the Narcan training helps with that. So of course you have to be 18 or older to take the training, but you get the medicine. It's a nasal. It goes in your nose. They spray it up. Even if the person is unconscious. We did a free training, and you get the free Narcan kit
And
with the
this
Narcan
goes
spray.
into a lot of the opioid crisis of America that's labeled, and it's I think it's more highlighted in rural and like a lot of white America, but it's real in the black community too. These prescription drugs.
Well, it's more so they say it's health issues in the other communities. We've had it here, since the 70s at
Jazz
least.
musicians since the
Issues.
60s. I mean, some form of depressant.
That's why I said at least
50s,
60s,
yeah,
70s,
I mean,
80s.
depending upon when, hence the whole kind of, you into that jazz meant, you got heroin. But that's,
Yeah.
one of those things. So what do you see? What do you see other projects in the future? What will you be wielding, working on, connecting to?
Right now, I am just about to have my first anniversary actually as a state board member. I was sworn in January
Congratulations.
1st in Lansing. Thank you. And I'm just going to be working hard. Equitable funding is a
It's
big
always been a challenge
priority.
when it comes to these school systems.
Yes, the structure for funding it's just horrible, and Proposal A has been on the books since the 80s. So we need to really pressure the legislators in Lansing to crack open Proposal A and make some amendments. For one, we fund according to the tax base. So if it's an impoverished area, of course there are gonna be impoverished schools. If it's a rich area, then the schools are going to have a better a quality system there. They're going to get more per pupil funding. So if you get 7,500 in Detroit, you get 13,000 in Bloomfield. That's not equitable funding. If you say, hey, well, they're getting 13,000 in Bloomfield, let's give everybody 13,000. That's equal funding, but that's still
Yeah.
not equitable funding.
Being the one of the positions I hold, and I don't hold many positions. I don't know how I end up in positions too. Shout out to the people that offer me positions, but the president of Detroit Northwestern's High School Alumni Association. And we get into this conversation
Awesome.
often because many of the people from the Alumni Association are from like the class of the 60s or the 50s. Shout out John Conyers, Damon Keefe, Willie Horton. It's a lot of great Northwesterners. But Northwestern made a transitional shift, I would say, in the 80s to become a different type of high school per se. Now, with that being said, it's other challenges that do exist when you talk about that funding, especially in a place like Detroit that has so many charter schools and the resources that charter schools may or may not offer comparable to public schools, but public schools have the explicit legal obligation to offer schooling for all students, like especially when it comes to IEE,
Special
which
needs.
like IEP,
IEP.
IEP. Like a lot of the special education students, almost like a lot of the neighborhood schools that exist, damn near, the rates can be somewhere between 30 to 60%, and
And then too, that's a part of equitable funding. So with equitable funding, a student that
Yeah.
has special needs would need a higher
resources.
percentage of funding.
for like social
for
workers
resources.
and,
A student
yeah.
that's in
Yeah.
VOTEC would need more, money per pupil. A
Yeah.
student that's in poverty, because they're so far behind, they need more money for those students. And it's not just the urban areas, it's the rural areas
I can
as
only
well.
I don't know so much in the rural, but I can know how sparingly. I think one of the things as poverty has become more pervasive throughout Detroit, even the transient nature. Like right now, next week, right, we're recording on December 17th. Next week, we will be loading up Christmas baskets to gift to students if they want. So we usually try to go to 40 families. That's what Northwestern alumni does. But it can be very difficult as the students have very transient households, as like, they're moving. It's more renters. It's no longer a large stock of home owners in the city of Detroit as it once was, though this was one of the biggest places of home ownership at one point. So it's like so many of these challenges are all so interconnected with money, race, and crystallized around education, because so many people decide where they want to live based on the school in the neighborhood. Like that may be the number one qualifying dynamic to make a house worth
it
a
is.
home value.
I have a background in real estate and real estate development. I still do real estate, but with I have clients that will call and say, put me in a shack in the Birmingham school district just so my kids can go to a good school. So that is extremely important for parents. And if parents are in a position where they can move out, they get stable enough, or, they change their situation enough and they are ready to move out of the hood, that's one of the main reasons, because
and that
the schools.
Also, being a Northwestern graduate 2001, which different type of school, I'm one to say depends on the type of kid you got. Because I love Northwestern. I love my Northwestern experience. But I can definitely say that you need to have the right type of attitude and the right type of mentality to go to a school like that. And I would say the same thing even for like a Birmingham Groves, because you're dealing with other dynamics of pressure, stress,
You are.
racism, discrimination. So, I think it depends
I think
on
they're
what
working
type
really
of kid.
hard to turn the schools around. Dr. Vitti is implementing some really good programs and new curriculums, since he's been there. But there has been historically, even with the emergency management situation.
That situation alone,
Yeah.
and I guess I'm going on a tangent here, but I really want to drill this point home. I had the opportunity to interview Kwame Kenyatta before he passed, and it was interesting when he spoke when he was on the Detroit school board. But there's a percentage of money that's going to pay off a debt that I believe Detroit public schools never should have accepted in the first place. And I feel that was that is illegal. The same thing for the city of Detroit too. So now you have this whole Detroit public school district that's operating outside of the auspices of Detroit public schools, because Detroit public schools is still paying off a debt that never was a debt that Detroit public school never was a debt that people we elected as Detroiters decided where that money should go. That was emergency management that decided that ran up that debt. It's so strange. It'd be like if you're listening to this, it'd be like somebody taking your credit card for 2 years, using it, and then your credit card company coming back saying, all right, look, we're going to give you your credit card back, but you got to pay back.
The emergency management was supposed to come and change conditions and improve conditions, but they
debt
created
and worse conditions. And now we have to pay back a debt that I don't think we should honor.
And part of that, too, what comes with that is the fact that the millage is going towards paying
huge
the debt.
Problem.
The state per pupil funding is going to the new school district, but the issue with that, too, is that with Proposal A, you cannot take any of that funding that you get from the state, that per pupil funding,
And
to go
that
towards
right
infrastructure.
there is, and see,
That's
to
what
me,
you
the
do the
millage should not
millages
be paying
for.
off a debt that never was actually incurred through people that we as
Yeah.
Detroiters voted for.
And so you have some schools that
Completely.
are really deteriorating, that
Completely.
need strong attention, but until that debt is paid off, they're not allowed to take money for infrastructure,
And it's
and they're not allowed
that
to
as
raise
well.
another millage.
And that's one of the and the city of Detroit has some of these challenges too that are causing, to me, red flags with these private public,
This is the city. Oh,
these private
city
public
itself.
relationships where you're almost like, okay, it sounds good that a corporation comes in and says, hey, we just want to help Detroit, or we want to help these kids. But it's like, okay, if your intentionality is to make profit, what is your interest in this? Like, it sounds good on paper, but, you know, like these private public relationships have become more, quote unquote, I guess, attractive, or opportunities, or spring to life, you know.
Well, you know, with the thing with that, and that's hard, because you have, you know, my MBA training, my business training, and I've studied all over the world. A city will offer the corporation, you know, tax abatements to bring them there. It can be very competitive. Like we
Amazon
saw,
probably.
who was that? Amazon.
They
Amazon
sure
went
did.
somewhere else. And here in Michigan, especially, you know, we were the big three. We had the biggest three corporations in the world, and that was our industry, the auto industry. We were not diverse. And we're still not
I would
diversified
say
enough.
not at
But
all,
we
really.
do. It's
I mean, no.
not when it comes to big industry. We do have a lot of corporations here in Detroit. We have a lot of corporations in Southfield.
But I mean, even my big list from
draw them here and to keep them here. Even
Yeah.
Co-America, when we went through that downturn, Co-America, their headquarters were downtown. They went to Dallas. And so you try to attract corporations and companies
But
so that there
even
are
to-
jobs, so that people can work, so that they can pay their taxes. I think one of the, I mean, and there's downsides to it. Don't get me wrong, but that is the thinking behind it, the methodology
I understand
of
the
it.
argument, but it's. I guess we get back on principle and intentionality in it. And
I think they
where
need to
is
be
it?
doing things
So,
for
like,
the community.
I just want to
but
get this
also
point.
with that, they say 30%. You know, usually there's different agreements. 30% of the jobs have to go
which
to
we've
the
seen
residents
them
of the city.
supersede that
But
like
who-
with the building of the Little Caesars Arena. We've seen corporations say, all right, we'll just pay the penalty because it's not enough educated. It's not an educated workforce that can cover it. They just tore down the house across the street from my house, like on my block, and it wasn't a black face involved in that whole process.
And that's true. And I worked for, like I said, I have a background in real estate development. So I worked for Heritage, which was the Diggs Group, which was over that development and over payroll and different portions of that project. I myself was going out in the community, which was not a part of my job, but just to make sure that we have contractors, minority contractors, that know that there's opportunities there. And they even created opportunities to partner, where the smaller companies could partner with the big companies so that they could get parts of the contract. was difficult. It was very difficult. That was not something where they were just, and there are times in construction where people are shut out, but there are times when there are not. They are literally not being shut out. People, we were getting the
I'm
word
not
out.
denying,
And
but okay, look, I guess what I'm saying is,
but not just with contractors, even
Yeah.
the permanent jobs.
I
They're
know.
supposed to hire 30%. There are
I know,
corporations
and
that
they'll
do
generally
not
say
do the 30%.
the educated workforce is
That
not
is not enough
is
talent.
not present, or like the point I was gonna make, and I just stopped my Crane subscription, but I think I'll get it till then. But the big list of employers in the city of Detroit, the number one employer, not our number two employer is Quicken Loans, but they only employ like maybe 2,300 people. So when you think about a city this large with this many people in this region to be listed as the number two employer, comparable to what was at one point in time, and to wield so much interest in development throughout the region, especially in Detroit itself and Detroit proper. When you look
Yeah.
at the per capita, does it balance out? I definitely could raise arguments on both sides, but 2,300 people ain't. It's
I think
I'm
this-
saying 2,300, but it's not.
I think the city
many at all.
of Detroit is. I think the city of Detroit itself is
That
the
is
number
the
one
truth.
employer. Is that right?
So
Yeah.
that alone
Um,
is a challenge.
And then too, I know that they were trying to put together. City council was trying to do the community benefits agreement. That was a little sketchy too. Not having community benefits agreement, but
hmm
the different levels that they had, and the different having been a part of the process with different
hmm
different communities, it can be a little
No.
difficult. It's not an easy process, but I definitely believe in community benefits agreements. I think it's just the way that you iron everything out. I think that corporations should invest back into the community that they are in, especially
Well, I
when they're getting
would
tax
say from shout out to another position that I'm in for right now. I'm sounding like I'm wielding stuff. I don't know, like I say, but the Hope Village initiative over here as the Greenway project starts, and it is a vine dock construction that's looking to build its way not far from my house that would put a lot more 18-wheeler traffic over here. So we're deciding what's going on, but sometimes, like, you look at the landmass and the desolate neighborhood, and you say to yourself, okay, you can probably put put a dockyard around here, but it's still a lot of young people. It's still me over here. I don't want to hear trucks banging around, moving,
Yeah.
all times of the night.
Yeah, and it shouldn't
Yeah,
be in a
but
residential area.
It would, but they're
necessarily
looking,
anyway.
moving fast to rezone to an industrial between Highland Park and Detroit, a yard not far from here. So it's things like that. So like,
And that's when the community has to get out and go
Mhm.
down to those zoning meetings. And a lot of times, if you go down in full force, they'll listen. Yeah, you guys have to organize and find out when those meetings are, and go down and make sure you're using your voice, and you're an activist, and use your leadership as well to help that
Yeah.
process.
So we definitely got to bring you back, and we can talk more processes like this and everything. But I want to close out with classic Detroit is different questions. What was your very first
Okay.
car, and what year, make, and model, and what year did you get it?
Oh my gosh, it was 200K or
A K
400K
car.
or 800K. I don't even remember
There we
what
go.
a K car or something, little silver box car I got from the auction, and I think I was about 19 or something. Took my tax money and went to the auction.
Where did you go when you first got it? Where was the first place you
Where did I
went to
go?
after you got your ride? Okay.
I don't
All right.
remember.
Okay.
Probably to show my mom or something.
And you're the DJ at the Detroit fireworks just ended. Jefferson, Woodward. You get to play 3 songs. What songs you playing?
Oh my God. I don't know. I'm old school. A Tupac,
Okay,
Biggie,
what songs,
and
though?
Prince. Oh gosh.
Biggie.
Probably
Okay.
Juicy from Biggie. Tupac. Almost anything Tupac.
Okay.
Keep Your Head Up. We'll do that one. And then Prince. I'm gonna have to bring it down with that one and do Purple
Okay.
Rain, and everybody
Just
had the
like
lighters
sign of the
out.
times. Okay, and you can rename Woodward after one Detroiter. Who would it be and why?
Oh gosh, there's so many good Detroiters. And I'm trying to think of somebody, and I can't think of his name right now. And I'm thinking of 2 people. Right now, the one was the Black Diplomat that I was thinking of, because I can't think of his name right now.
Nah, you said that.
Do you
I'm
know who I'm
thinking
talking
Cameron.
about? He was a U.S. diplomat. No, he was a U.S.
Ralph Bunch?
diplomat, and I can't
Okay,
think of his
okay.
Ralph Bunch. He hasn't had enough recognition. That's
Okay.
that's
definitely
who
not
I was thinking of.
Cameron.
But also, it would be a tie. Congressman John Conyers, who
The
recently
Northwestern
passed.
Coat. Northwestern Coat.
Yeah, he did so much, and we could never thank him enough for what he did, and I don't feel like he got enough love from Detroit. You know, it was particular people, but just overall, he went to other places. DC respected him so much. I just don't feel like, even before the issues that happened at the latter part, you know, at the end of his career, I just felt like he wasn't getting the respect
I want to
that
do
he
a
deserved.
whole. I need to do that. I need to do a whole piece on some of the legacy of John Conyers, because it's very dynamic. It's very deep.
It's deep.
And I don't think a lot of people understand it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you
peace.
for the opportunity.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.